very honour of chairing the debate. The motion is that this House believes that Trinity College is going in the wrong direction, and the first speaker on the proposition is Kate Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society. I was reliably informed by people who know about such things that you should never start a speech with an apology, so I'm not going to, but I am going to start with a confession, which is that I am absolutely, unequivocally, 100% an academic brat of the highest order. My father is a lecturer, my mother's a professor, my aunts and uncles are generally lecturers. I went to the creche here, I walked on the grass, I've walked under the campanile. I am also pro-fees, which is a bit weird, and pro-intellectual elitism of all varieties, and I'm anti-going to class in general. So these are all a little weird when I'm standing up here and saying that Trinity College is heading in the wrong direction, precisely because Trinity College seems to be heading in the exact opposite direction of me. But I think that it's important not to focus on kind of nitpicking aspects of why I don't like Trinity or why I don't like aspects of Trinity, but instead focus on what we want a university to be, and on what we think a university can be, and on why we think Trinity isn't achieving these goals. We have to look at what Trinity has shown itself to want to be, what its actions over the last number of years particularly have suggested about it as a place and its ethos and its substance. Because I think we can all safely say that we recognise that Trinity College is aware of its reputation in the world, it's aware of its place on league tables, it worries about its research, it worries about the amount of sightings of its research it has. It's very concerned about its reputation, but I think that in being concerned about its reputation, it's lost sight of the substance that should be underlying that reputation. No, thank you, not just yet. And what I mean by that is simply, at the moment, we can see that the college is putting forward research as being more important than education, and it's putting forward employability as being more important than intellectualism. We see that in relation to the areas that they choose to fund, like funding massive amounts of research without funding, that library where, we'd like to do an essay once or twice on a Sunday. God forgive us if that's the case, but it's still true and we still need it open. So we have to look at all these different things and bitch and moan, to a certain extent, pardon my language, about semesterisation, and recognise the fact that we as undergraduates are the people who compose this college. Yes, postgraduates are important as well, Ronan, I swear. But it's not just about the staff that works here, and it's not just about the staff's interests. We have to address what is meant by an education. We have to address whether or not we want our college to be this paternalistic and rather overbearing influence that it seems to be becoming over the last number of years. I'm sure all of you are in some way, shape or form aware of the junior dean. If you aren't, you have been in minor ways, in that the reason why we will only give you 2 drinks is because we only can give you the 2 drinks. The reason why there isn't music is because the junior dean is generally anti-joy and happiness in Trinity College. There is an incredibly paternalistic aspect, and though I don't object to either of those 2 things in any grand, or overbearing way, I do think that they are emblematic of an incredibly paternalistic environment. I think Trinity has to be a place where everyone can be free to explore ideas and to find out the person that they are hoping to be and to become that person. Whether that's, the library being open on a Sunday or being able to play music that you want to play. I think that you need to be able, or you need to have the opportunity and the freedom to find out who you are in college. And I think that that's what college should be about. I think education shouldn't be about the number of classes you attend. It should be about how you do in exams, obviously, but it should be about your worth at the end of the day and the amount of time you put into your subject. Go ahead.
Madam, if this is the case, why don't you get a life coach instead of a university degree?
Nice one. I have a life coach, they're awesome, but the reason why I want this from a degree is because I think that you can have a plethora of life coaches. No, I think that each professor and each lecturer does have an ability to shape, and does have, to a certain extent, a responsibility to shape the intellectual development. And yes, I do believe that it's intellectual development, but I think that intellectual development needs to be fostered in a wider sense of general freedom. I think, for example, that the freedom to drink doesn't have a definite effect on whether or not, you become intellectually, who you want to be. But I do think that the ethos that underlies that paternalism does have an effect on the intellectual aspects as well. And I think that this actually comes to bear a bit more significantly when we look at the correlation between funding and the government, which is the government gives the university the funding. Because this actually does have a very significant limiting effect on what the administrators can do within a college and what the administrators are told to find more important. And I think if we look at that quite in depth, we'll see that the limitations that are placed on these academics, or that is placed on these administrations, does foster a sense of limitation in relation to the academics and what an academic can choose to do, and that does affect an intellectual and a general limitation on what we as undergraduates and just general students of this college can do. And I think all of those things are incredibly significant. I think that the relationship between the government and the colleges at the moment is an incredibly negative one, in that I think that the distinction between a state and a university should be as ingrained as a distinction between the state and the church. The universities, the intellectuals, the academics, be they students or be they the lecturers, should be allowed to challenge their government. And I think while the government is pouring funds in, and we are solely reliant on that government to get those funds, hence my pro-fees, that is a bad thing. I think that there are other ways, rather than introducing fees, just to put it on out of the issue for tonight. I think that the government could give each individual some kind of loan and or some kind of cash every year to spend, some kind of university voucher system. I know that's a bit out there and I know it's a bit crazy, but I do think there are ways of limiting the interaction between the government and the university. And I think it's unfortunate that Trinity College isn't pursuing those avenues and is willing to remain a kind of a sidekick and a puppy of the government, because I think that that's bad for intellectual freedom, and I think that it's bad for general freedom. And though I think it's fair to say that we shouldn't just let students run riot so that they can discover themselves, and though I think it's fair to say that you shouldn't expect a life coach in terms of university, I do think it's fair to accept that we shouldn't be in university just for a job. I think it's fair to accept that we should be in university for an education. I think it's fair to accept that part of that education is just a general all-round life education, so you can talk amongst your friends about things, so you can talk about issues in societies like this and have a nice time, so that you can go to the library on a Sunday. And I think that it's unfortunate, and I think that it is backed up ridiculously frequently by the actions of Trinity, that they do put education, or they do put research in relation to their staff ahead of the education of their students. I think they do put the employability of their alumni ahead of the intellectualism of that alumni, and I think that both of those things are absolutely detrimental. I also think that the paternalistic element does limit our freedom, both intellectually and in general, and even though I went to the crash here, I'm getting tired 20 years later of being treated like a child by Trinity College Dublin. For this reason, I move to oppose.
I'm also going to start off with a confession. Structure is something I'm going to be rather freely abandoning in this speech. Generally, what I'm going to be talking on comes under the general heading of weighing up what the college needs versus what the needs of an individual student are, because that's also what we've basically been brought by our first proposition speaker. Because what I talked about in my point of information there was, why not get a life coach instead of getting a university degree, is because what we've had is this idea that, university is going to shape us into the people we're going to be. And it's like, yeah, well, so is life. So is every part of your life. Whether you go to university or whether you don't, your life and your life experiences and your general life learning is going to shape you into a person and change the person you're going to be. And we had this idea of intellectual development, instead of education being the priority. And what I would say to this is that this is coming back to an idea which, with our student union president as the chair, I'm a bit scared of saying, but an idea that is touted by the student union, that you have a right to a third level education. And you have this right, apparently, according to proposition, for this third level education to not just be about employability, to not just be about whatever, but also to be this life-enhancing and enriching experience, which is going to change you forever and ever and make you the perfect person that you always wanted to be and Barney told you could be. So what I'm going to talk about is, Kate mentioned that her parents, or work within the university system, and my parents work within the primary system. And what I see from that is that, in general, with your parents as educators, you learn that too much pressure is placed on the education system as a whole. We say that we've had this from the proposition speaker, but we can see it all the way from primary school level up to university level, where this paternalistic environment isn't just there, it is expected to be there. It is criticised if it is not there, from every single level. Because the fact is that it is seen as this is the structure which is taking over from your parents. These are, where the primary school teachers are who you're with for almost as long as you're with your parents because you have the long hours. That there is this idea that they have this duty to shape you, and this idea of the ability of a lecturer to shape your intellectual development. Yeah, they have an ability to do that. I have an ability to affect someone's emotional development. That doesn't place a burden on me to make sure that they are emotionally developed to the point where they are fully self-actualized. No, thank you, madam. What it is that my duty is to myself. The lecturer's duty is to the education system, because that's what it is, in fact, about. Okay. Talking about this idea of what the college needs versus what an individual student needs. In this respect, we've had this idea of looking at reputation without substance, and looking at the idea of the relationship between the government limiting the college in itself. What we say is that there are mainly two problems with this. There's the problem with the world in general, the big dirty R word, which I don't really want to say out loud, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. There's cutbacks linked to this R word. There are job losses linked to this R word. I don't want to get done for parliamentary language, and it's become such a horror these days. I don't want to say it just in case, but I think we all know. So in general, there is this environment, and in general also, if I'm not really sure where Kate stands about whether Trinity's direction, because it's free fees, is what we're going with, or pro fees. But anyway, let's just talk about the fact that it is free fees. So what do we have? What does the university have to survive? Because we say that for some reasons, tradition is a good thing. Staying with the old ways are a good thing. And at the same time, we say that the university needs to be able to adapt and survive, because that's what the big picture is here. Because the fact is that we're not going to be able to be undergraduate students or postgraduate students or any kind of students if the university doesn't survive. And we say that while we may have to sacrifice elements of our ethos, and in some cases prioritise research and prioritise employability, we say that why that is because of the importance of the ranking system to the college life, and I will go on to that after here.
Is there any danger of the college ceasing to exist?
Is there a danger of the college ceasing to exist? There is, if the money goes away, because as much as we want to say that education is so important to us and the university is so important to us, we say that, man cannot live by bread alone. The university cannot work on intellectualism alone. The fact is that money makes the world go round. Money makes the university go round. No, thank you, sir. We say that, yes, we can live in a world where we're all fuzzy bunnies, and we say that there's always going to be a way to make the university survive. But the fact is that's not the kind of world we live in. The fact is that a reputation is what the university has to trade off. The fact is that the reputation of an institution where we are one of the top 50 in international institutions, that international levels of excellence is what we should be striving for. And if this is how we can strive for it, by prioritising some of these things, and by that means have the means to survive, have the means to make all the sort of reforms and prioritise, and thank you, all this self-actualisation, lovey, happy bunny stuff, then that's also a bonus. Because, as well as this idea of, entitlement to an education in general, looking at the idea of where the entitlement comes to shape an institution. And what we say is that when you're entitled to shape an institution and to change all these traditions which we hold so dear, and to change this institution which we value so greatly and which has been here for hundreds of years, we say that to do this, there has to be an idea that there's an objective harm, that there's an objectively bad direction that is being gone in, as opposed to prioritising certain elements over others which are subjectively better than others. This idea that subjectively employability over intellectualism is a bad thing. We say that to do this, to have this objection to the interaction, we have to be shown actual harm, as opposed to this idea that, well, the university is also supposed to provide us with all this lovely self-actualization ideas, and it isn't, so that's why we're unhappy. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that what the college needs is, for the big picture, is survival. And with survival can come all these changes to make all the happy bunnies that the proposition want. I keep saying that, I'm not sure why, I'm sorry. But anyway, what the big picture is here is that we all want the university to survive. We want the university to be the best university that it can be. We say that in that, we have to give up this idea of entitlement to certain things, and we have to accept the importance of certain things for the university to survive, like the ranking system, like prioritising research over these things, like prioritising employability over intellectualism sometimes. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to oppose.
Our second speaker on the proposition is Mr. Anthony McDonald.
Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. All right, I'm going to look at several things, but in this debate I'm going to look at fun stuff, tradition, and money, basically. But first, like, something that Eamon brought up. Like, the college is in debt of loss of revival. Like, I don't think anybody here really believes that's true. I don't think we're going to come in tomorrow and Trinity's just not going to exist, or not going to even nearly not exist. What she's talking about is the loss of money and Trinity being less good. But the fact is, at the moment, most of our funding comes from the government, and we get the same amount of funding as universities like Limerick and Galway, who are far less tradition and far lower down the rankings than we are at the moment. So this is not a question of, like, is Trinity going to survive? And even if it was, I don't want to live in a university or go to a university that merely only purpose is to get by day in and day out. Merely only purpose is to still exist. I want to go to a university that is the best, that's going to be the best, and holds on to the reasons that it is so good. Things like tradition, things like being old, things which may not be going away. But if you cut all ties to your previous existence, if you cut all ties to what you used to be, then in a sense you're merely a new body, and you don't have right to claim to be the 16th oldest university in the world, ladies and gentlemen. Because you're simply a new and fabricated thing. And by the way, we used to be 16th best university in the world, and that's what we're remembered for. None of this like 19th stuff. But on to like the fun stuff. Like there's been massive cuts in the freedom students have had in Trinity over the last couple of years from people like the junior dean. Like until 2005, during Freshers Week, they used to bring kegs into the GMB, and everybody was allowed to drink as much as they wanted. Admittedly, no thank you. Admittedly, it didn't always go well. But students had more fun. And what have we been left with instead? Like you're allowed two drinks, and they must be between 6 and 11. And if you don't get if you give out more than that, you can be fined, ladies and gentlemen. Like that's not the way I want my college to go. Maybe I'm different in this, but I don't see that as the place I like to spend my life. No, thank you. And we've seen further cuts. Like we used to have 2 pubs in this university, and now we have 1. That's half the man's place so I can go to drug. I don't have to walk all the way to the path. No, thank you. But more serious things, things like handing out food, things like freedom to like prepare food has been cut and like almost destroyed. Food stock under the junior dean lost her way in some kind of meeting because the college is trying to stop societies handing out prepared food, ladies and gentlemen, and that is a cut of freedom, and I don't believe in this. Now on to tradition. No, thank you. Trinity isn't famous for being the 49th best university in the world. 43rd. People in other countries don't go, oh, look at that university in Ireland. It's, better than most of our universities.
Sure.
No, thank you. They remember Trinity because it's tradition. They remember Trinity because things like Trinity Week. No, thank you. Trinity Term, which they have in Oxford and Cambridge and places like Lincoln Inn, because it's a part of the year.
Sir.
Yeah, I'll take you now.
I think the reason that Barry is slapping his head is that Trinity term and these Trinity terms aren't referring to Trinity College.
No.
In fact, there are lots of Trinity colleges, and also the ranking system is also important for external investors.
No. Most external investors, first of all, know that the ranking system is foolish, and that universities like UCD can fund a lot of people to merely publish stuff that'll get citations, so that their citation list goes higher, so that they're better in the university standings. Like people who really know universities know that there's massive flaws in the system, and there is no proper way to truly investigate how good a university is. Because you end up with people like Trinity at the moment, and like UCD, no thank you, funding hugely just research that'll lead to higher citations, pumping huge amounts of money into that ranking system, ladies and gentlemen, which is not the kind of college I want to be. No, sorry. I realised what you were saying about the Trinity Week. No, mainly what I'm saying is, we're recognised for that, and we're tied to that, and yet we're throwing it away because our Trinity Week no longer aligned with, say the Church of England's Trinity Week. We no longer have a proper Trinity term, and we're this college tied like many other colleges to this great name, to this great church idea. No, thank you. And we're throwing it away. We're throwing away that tradition, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. For the sake of what, ladies and gentlemen? No, thank you. We're throwing this away, and I have a problem with that because, that's something that made me feel good about my university, and it's something that is nice to be tied to. And instead, what are we getting? We're getting we're getting more American. We're getting more American students. We're pulling in. No, more. Sorry, 1 year American students. We're pulling in things like we're pulling in more students for 1 year. We're pulling in things like a money maker, money spinner, and that's like, it's less pro student. It's less pro student when you have to. When you have to, no thank you, when you have to sit exams at certain parts of the year. I think the last part of my speech is better. And no thank you. No. And you get massive amounts of pressure and less pro-student system. And then we're also getting with money this like massive pressure to cut things like small class teaching in, say, the history department, which is putting an increasing amount of pressure to put small class teaching, because small class teaching is expensive. And yet, like, what Trinity history department is famous for is its small class teaching, and the reason it's the only decent history department in the country. We're getting more and more pressure to work with their postgraduate students instead of their undergraduate students, because their postgraduate students do research and, you know, might make some money and might make like Irish history look more cool, rather than the undergrad students who go into society. And I have a problem, and I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a good way for a history department to be. And finally, like, we have this whole idea from Emer about money and library cuts, and no thank you, and the big OR word. And I say, like that might be true. There probably should be some cuts due to recession, but we just spent €6 million to build the long room hub. I don't know what the long room hub is. I don't like the long room hub as a thing, but I particularly don't like that it costs €6 million. At the same time, they cut €650,000 from the library budget. I think that they do this. Why? Because every person every person in society, so the people like the provost want to make a name for themselves. They don't want to be remembered as that guy who provided good university for 10 years. They want to be a society who contributed something to society to the college. The person who left something behind. And that's a problem. When everybody wants to leave something behind, when everybody wants their mark to be there, they push money to things like the Long Room Hub, to be the guy who got Trinity to the 43rd best university in the world. And instead of working on the little things, instead of working on the day-to-day students, this day-to-day students being better, ladies and gentlemen, which is why Trinity is in the wrong direction. And I don't know what the answer to that problem is. So, ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to propose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Hist, welcome. So basically, so far what we had is from Anthony some sort of Animal House model wherein students have more fun. Previously, the GMB provided kegs for Freshers Week. That's actually all it provided for Freshers Week, lots and lots of kegs. I think it's probably a good thing that the junior dean actually cut money there, because then it actually puts an emphasis on us actually doing something and providing the students with facilities and events and stuff. Previously, what the Phil used to do, speaking as the DC, not some sort of betrayal or angry speech, what we used to do is get people really, 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 really drunk. Now what we have to do is provide comedy debates, choral, choir, concert things, whatever you call them, I don't know. I don't speak music. The Hist put on stuff like the Damien What's-His-Face concert. Very tired, it's essay week. Which admittedly fine, people have a problem with semesterization. Anthony vaguely alluded to the fact that Trinity Arm isn't there anymore, and it's sad, I feel, that we're not going to commemorate the Matrix films anymore during a specific week in college, but I think it's okay to trade this off. But generally, I think what this debate comes down to is, whether or not we think there should be a trade-off between this whole concept of employability versus intellectualism, whether or not there's actually a place for universities to merge these two concepts. Well, firstly, Anthony talked about tradition, and Kate talked about intellectualism. So you're looking for a place on a Wednesday night when all our assignments are due, where you can discuss highbrow ideas, where we can engage in these great rhetorical wank fests, essentially. Fine. Got to resist the temptation to respond to that. where you want tradition and old stuff. Gonna throw it out there. I think we already have that. It's called the Hist, and it's called the Phil. We've got a building. We're sitting in it right now. Do I think that it's good that we have this? Yes. Do I think that newer universities don't have it? Yes. Do I think that's a pity? Yes. I mean, we talk a lot about Trinity being owned, stuff like that. Fine. We're talking about semesterization. Why has semesterization come about? To an extent, it's probably part of this whole idea of league tables, but also it's an Irish thing, which is combined with a European thing in 2000 was the Lisbon Declaration, where there was this engagement from the government in a minute to make Ireland and Europe a knowledge-based economy, and it needed to be competitive, and it needed to put a focus on knowledge. And I think, people look at this and they think, right, so it's a lot of policy talk in there, talking the abstract and these policy goals which they can't necessarily achieve and they don't necessarily want to achieve. But I mean, it's not the first time we've engaged in a discussion like this. Catherine?
Okay, so debating societies are a brilliant thing. Isn't it a problem that Trinity College is the kind of place where staff influence allows the CSE to spend more money on its dinners and on renting tables that they already could use from the arts block for refreshers week instead of, I don't know, giving it to societies who could do something for the students with it?
So your problem there is basically there needs to be checks and balances for CSC. Fine, then there can be checks and balances for a CSC. I don't think that's a large problem with the college ethos or the direction the college is going in. I think that's a problem with spending in most universities where it needs to be overseen. That's why there's actually going to be a review of SU and college spending in general as it stands. So that's not a problem in terms of our directions. This is something that's actually being addressed as it stands at the moment. But I mean, when we're talking about this whole concept of, as well, of a push and a pressure for academia to be presented, we do have the fine tradition of schools, which can be something which initiates a mixed reaction between persons of whether or not it's a good thing or not. And in terms of Trinity's direction, it's certainly changed recently because of semesterization, and we've yet to see whether or not it's going to be successful or not under its new format. But I think the fact that Trinity had these particular mechanisms for trying to push people to better themselves academically, to not just get complacent when they get into Trinity and say, hey, we're in the best university in Ireland, we can do what we want. I think the fact that it tries to drive people towards bettering themselves intellectually speaking and academically speaking is a very good part of Trinity's identity. And hopefully this new format will work out. We'll see. But furthermore, I mean, there is this whole issue of the real world, and people use the word job and capitalism like it's some sort of dirty word in these debates quite often, that it's a bad thing to want to get a job after college. I personally, as a fourth year, think it's a pretty good thing that there are some measures in place to provide me with a job. I know that, I can't just waste it out. I mean, fine, in the past for Trinity, you were part of like the landed gentry or something when we came here, and you killed some time, and, you discriminated against some Catholics and so on, sit down. And then you went on to, look after your land and so on and so forth. But these days, fine, we live in the market economy. Wizzo's free market, it's magical and it's an all-powerful God, and we must bow down to it for some reason. But the reality is we do live in a capitalist society, we do need jobs, and we do need qualifications for those jobs. It's all well and good to read lots of books, it's a lot of fun, but you also need to be able to apply those skills in the real world, and sure, it's about whether or not a history degree can go on, personal history degree can go on to, go for it.
There are institutes of technology whose previous focus would be vocations. Trinity is a university whose vocation, or whose entire ethos should be about education, and it should be about just wanting to read books and just learning about books, and we should leave teaching people how to do jobs to other societies and to other institutes that are well capable of doing it and that can do so very well.
I think that's actually, it's a nice idea that we can, personally, I would love nothing more than spend my entire time just feck-arsing about reading books and whatnot. But the reality is that, well, firstly, back to the free fees rant, it's really rubbish. But free fees does actually put a pressure on people to go to university, which doesn't exist otherwise, but that's a vague aside. But no, as it stands, if you want to go to the best university, you go to Trinity. And you shouldn't have to not want to get a job afterwards, especially in the real world. It's something which we all need. I mean, there have been, probably these debates have gone on for years of whether or not Trinity's heading the wrong direction. First they let in Catholics, then they let in women, and now they're trying to let in people with jobs, as opposed to just intellectuals in academia. But I mean, I think there is a way in which Trinity can, and largely does, try to merge employability and intellectualism. I think that through providing facilities such as this building and these societies, which are to an extent funded by the college, that we can allow for a merging of these two ideas, and there can be an opportunity for people to read books. But I think at the end of the day that if a university doesn't provide you with a certain degree of qualifications, and that it doesn't teach you how to apply the learning which you get from this experience, then it's a failing. But as it stands, Trinity College is not heading in the wrong direction. I urge you to oppose the motion.
Our third speaker for proposition is Dr. Gerald Morgan.
Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Auditor, friends of the Hist, I picked that up just now. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have the full complement here. I didn't realise this was going to be quite such an intimidating experience when I agreed as a last-minute substitute for the great Sean Barrett to say something for this proposition. Let me begin by making a number of independent points relating to what has been said so far, although I may say that this list, which gives me the possibility of producing an irredeemably dire speech with 0 out of 10, is something which is going to leave my reputation in tatters at the end of this evening, I'm afraid. The issue is probably about freedom here, however we wish to define it, and I would say that one of the things that has been happening in all my time in college, it's 41 years now in fact, is that our freedom is gradually being eroded. The university is becoming more bureaucratic, and one of the things which irritates me immensely is this idea of minus 10% for late submission of essays. It's the most unintellectual notion and unworthy of a university of any substance whatsoever. And I am just simply amazed that there aren't, it isn't simply lampooned and ridiculed in the student newspapers until we dispense with it altogether. I remember once after finals chasing a young man to Sweden to try to persuade him to present as an essay so that we could mark it. That's the old Trinity. You know, the idea that, you know, we're trying to give everybody a fair chance by giving everybody the same length of time, as though that is actually measurable. It's a most unintellectual and bureaucratic and worthless idea. And it militates against the freedom which is necessary for intellectual development. So some people, you could give 5 years to write an essay on Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and it would still be irredeemably dire at the end of that. So the fact that we measure these things by time in that kind of way is dismaying for a university of this greatness we hear on all sides. I'm sure that's right. A lecturer's duty is to shape the intellectual development of the student. I wish someone had told me that. What an extraordinary idea. My duty is to my subject. I try to understand it as well as I can. I try to present it and argue for it, and I hope to interest the odd student about it. But you're responsible for shaping your own intellectual development, not me. And you do it by being challenged by lecturers who've already shaped their development in a way and then actually expound the subjects that they know something about. So we may present you, if we're any good, I suppose, with a challenge which will lead you to read and reflect and to develop in the kind of free atmosphere that we used to have and we have less now. So my duty is to my subject. And of course, I have a duty to students in the same way, but it's not in that kind of, that's a kind of propagandist way, looking for disciples or that kind of thing. It's simply feeble, I would say. The danger to the college survival, we've had all kinds of dismissive views about the college survival. I came here in 1968, we were in danger of survival. Let me tell you, we were on the wrong side of a national revolution in 1916. Ever since then, we've been in danger of survival. We were one of the world's great universities up to 1916, equal to Oxford and Cambridge. None of this 43rd equal. Whoever among you wants to be 43rd equal in anything? This is another case of spin. We're inventing league tables. Someone on high table will say, well, the German universities, they don't bother to enter this kind of non-competition and so on. We're now 43rd equal. That is the result, we're told, by the improved structures of the college and the new managerial systems. It's intellectual nonsense. Of course, it's intellectual nonsense. That's why we have people in universities who see through this kind of bogus sort of comparison. Well, if you're cheered by being 43rd equal, then my sympathies are with you, and I hope Santa Claus has something happier to give you on the 25th. But it is painfully unintellectual. Just painfully unintellectual. And I expect all our brilliant young Trinity students to see through that kind of thing. And again, to lampoon it. It deserves to be lampooned. We're going backwards. This is retrogressive. This is not advanced. This doesn't create jobs for anyone. Of course our people got jobs. They're brilliant. people who are intellectually developed, with the kind of training that you have at Trinity College Dublin. Generally speaking, that is not a great issue. It hasn't been in the past particularly. Of course, given the way the country has been so mismanaged and the global economy has been so mismanaged, perhaps it's becoming a problem. Then maybe we have to think about that in a kind of way. But that shouldn't impinge too much on our arguments here. Now, I don't know how long I have and when you will start ringing the bell to tell me to stop, but I'm just now, that's the preliminary comments about what has been said so far. So I have no responsibility for your intellectual development whatsoever. I have a responsibility for my own intellectual integrity, and I have a duty to my subject, and that is true for everyone who is teaching here. It's your responsibility. But you can't exercise that responsibility unless you're given the freedom to exercise it. And that's what you have in you. Of course, freedom can be misused, and that's the price we have to pay. The alternative is having no freedom at all, and therefore constraint and no development. Now, I thought this was a very important subject to raise, and this is why I'm pleased to be here. And I had put some thoughts together, and I now turn to the speech and what time is left to me here. I was on High Table the other night, and somebody said to me, "You're an expert in Chaucer, aren't you?" I was taken aback by that. It's a big thing to say, that you're an expert in Chaucer, such a great genius. So I sort of dithered somewhat, but he assumed that I would have to be an expert in something or another to be on High Table. So let us say then, I'm an expert on Chaucer. I've been teaching Chaucer here for 41 years, more or less ineffectually. I have brought, more or less, I have brought no money into the college whatsoever. I actually have cost the college a great amount of money, one way or another. So that is a definition, I would say, of stunning mediocrity, a complete failure in terms of the entrepreneurship which is looked for in scholars these days. An absolutely mind-boggling and perplexing idea, destructive of scholarship. It never occurred to me that I would be expected to bring money into the college through various projects of one kind and another. That's a deformation of the university ideal. I take some comfort from Chaucer, the greatest English poet, in his portrait of the scholar in the general prologue. This is what he says: "But albeit that he was a philosopher, yet had he but little gold in coffre, but all that he micht of his friendes hente, on bokes and on learning he it spente." He spent it all on books and learning. Now, the university is a medieval institution, and it is at its core are books and learning, and along with that, the disinterested pursuit of the truth. This is not a far-fetched, naive, non-real ideal. The universities make it possible, studying medieval subjects in which we have no particular bias this way or that, to approach it in a disinterested way in our search for the truth. At the centre, as I say, are books and learning, and it's not the pursuit of individuals with their personal ambitions. You're quite right. Personal ambitions result in one terrible building after another. We've seen a whole series of buildings in the last 40 years, none of them of any distinction whatsoever. But in order to give some definition to one individual or another's personal ambition, universities are communities of learning. The great benefit you have in being at Trinity College Dublin, being a great university, there are lots of brilliant people here. That's where you learn, in discussions with them. That's not a far-fetched idea either. So the dining hall where we all used to eat together, or this magnificent old library, used to be stuffed with books. Do you understand that? The colonnades, when I came here, stuffed with books from the floor to the ceiling. Books. Of course, they were removed, and now we have a shop. Now we're in a world then in which we can't afford to devote money to books, can we? 650,000 removed from books. Students no longer being able to find books on the shelves. What a statement about our priorities. The library opening hours in Trinity, the world's 43rd equal university, the worst in Ireland. Just simply incredible. I'm surprised that the students are so mild-mannered. Let me assure you, they were not in the 1960s, in fact, for whatever reason. But you can't always be mild-mannered in life. If you are, people will remove your books. They have. So I say this is a blot on the Trinity escutcheon. Even worse, the Book of Cows is used as a money-making exercise. It's not admired for the medieval learning that it implies. It's a way of making money, so that we see then when the library is shut, without the books, that the shop is open and the tourists are coming in their droves for the Book of Cows. Again, what an extraordinary reversal of priorities. Tourists matter, students don't. Selling trinkets matters, reading books don't matter. You want to call yourself a great university and have these things? We didn't have these things in 1968. We were poorer in 1968. You want to say something?
How do you expect the university to be funded if you don't want to produce anything productive yourself? You don't want to use
That's right. Of course that's right. I'm not saying that financing is not a problem. I may say, though, and I'll come back to my point, Trinity was in much greater danger of failing to survive financially when I came here in the 1940s and 50s, and ever since the rising in 1916. Of course, that's a problem, but that doesn't justify this kind of method of financing. You have to choose what you want to spend your money on. Here we have this hub destroying its fellow square. Is it destroying fellow square? And potentially destroying the whole front of college. Is that the way to spend our money? So in fact, there's that kind of general question. Of course we have to finance things, but you look at the kind of way people are spending money and the waste that is involved in all that. So those are always practical discussions. But let me say to you that in poorer times, Trinity managed to make its way without doing these things. And indeed, if you have to bring people into the Book of Cows, do you have to put that hideous poster in front of it saying, here is the Book of Cows in front of a light? That is just crude and vulgar, and it's a sign, actually, of decline. I would want to say that the reason why we survive is the moral force of learning. Learning can be an inspiring thing. I remember when Michael Portillo came here a year or so ago, he came through Front Gate, there was Edmund Burke. That impressed him enormously. That is what learning gives us. It gives us a moral force.